A young man quits his job in solidarity with the principles of his generation, or because all hope for gratuitous hubba hubba is gone. You decide. Welcome to Strip Coverlet. We are here for a short story discussion, the 66th short story discussion in the short story discussion playlist here on the channel. Today's video is on A and P by John Updike. We will have a So What Happened portion of this video. We will have a literary criticism portion of this video, and finally a writer's corner portion of this video. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So what happened? Well, it's summertime, and 19-year-old Sammy is at work as a cashier at A&P, sort of a department store slash convenience store type of place. He is a cashier there, running the register in as lazy a fashion, I suppose, as it could be hoped. Things are ho-hum until three girls come in wearing only their bikinis. And wouldn't you know it, by the time they're ready to leave, they decide to go through Sammy's lane. And as he's ringing them up, the store manager notices them and decides to come up and tells the girls that they have to be dressed decent to be in the store. They are embarrassed, obviously, being called out in front of the other customers as they are leaving. And then Sammy quits on the spot. His boss tries to talk him out of it, saying that he'll feel it for the rest of his life and that he didn't want to do this to his parents. Sammy agrees on both fronts, but decides to leave anyway. So, for literary criticism, I actually want to put one more thing in here, and that is small town. We are in a small town, and we know this by the fact that our boss has told us that we will feel walking out of our job at 19 for the rest of our lives. Now, I think it needs to be said, this story was published in 1961. So we're talking about a world 60 years ago where certain things are very, very different. Personally, I didn't know that everything would have electric doors, because I remember growing up in Kansas City, Missouri in the 90s, and stores didn't all have electric doors then. But besides that, being in a small town means that we're going to feel the ramifications of walking out on a job, because there might not be other jobs to get. There might not be other jobs where your reputation does not precede you. Reputation that will precede you to the fact where your parents are going to feel social repercussions for you walking out of your job. These two details let us know that this is a small town, and this is a different type of America. This is a different type of country than we live in right now, and we're going to get into that a little bit more with point number 4, but there are a couple of small points along the way that I thought were interesting enough to talk about here. We get this quote very early in the short story. You know, it's one thing to have a girl in a bathing suit down on the beach, where what with the glare, nobody can see each other much. Anyway, and another thing in the cool of the A&P, under the fluorescent lights against all those stacked packages, with her feet paddling along naked over our checkerboard green and cream rubber tile floor. It is interesting, isn't it, the different contexts in which life happens. If you see someone in a bikini at the beach, it's not a big deal. If you see someone in that same bikini at the store, it's a little bit out of place. It's a little bit jarring. It's a little bit, dare I say, risque. It's a little bit, dare I say, sexually enticing. Now, these bikinis, as they are described, are about the same amount of. So the girls are then told they're not dressed decent, they have to go, and they protest. They say, "We are dressed decent." Now, change the context of that clothing just a little bit more. It's about the same amount of clothing as a bra and panties. If you see a bra and panties at the beach, that is scandalous. If you see a bra and panties at the A&P, at the convenience store, that is certainly not being dressed decent. So it is strange the way that we sort of contextualize life and use these different filters for different things as we go along. Not a great big deal, just thought it was worth mentioning here. And now here, number 3 on this lit crit portion. I've worked retail since I was 17 years old. I've had other jobs as well, but I've always worked retail too. Nothing. So we get this in the short story as the girls are coming up to the counter and they're getting ready to buy something strange, fish. Where is it? I couldn't get over what it was called. It was fish and sour cream. Queenie puts down the jar and I take it into my fingers, icy hands. I can't read today. Queenie puts down the jar and I take it into my fingers, icy cold. Kingfish fancy herring snacks in pure sour cream. 49 cents. Now her hands are empty, not a ring or a bracelet, bare as God made them, and I wonder where's the money coming from. Still with that prim look, she lifts a folded dollar bill out of the hollow at the center of her nubbled pink top. The jar went heavy in my hand. Really, I thought that was so cute, end quote. Nothing is worse than sweaty titty money, except for sweaty sock money. Yes, I have had customers dig around in their bra to hand me sweaty dollar bills. And the only thing that outweighs that in the ick and disgust factor that I've had as far as payments are concerned is someone digging around in their sock. Pulling bills out of their sock. This is especially egregious in the summer months, and it happens more often than I would like to pass on here. Now, the main thrust of this short story, the main literary criticism that we're dealing with, at least as far as I can tell, is this. This story is published in 1961. Sammy is a young guy, and he's part of the sexual revolution. The kids in the 60s. He's 19 in... Presumably, the short story is set in real time. I don't know 100%, but we have no reason to believe that this is set in the past or the future. So if you're 19 in 1961, you're the exact generation of the sexual revolution. Lingle, the manager who comes up and kicks the girls out, he is part of the older generation. He is not part of the sexual revolution. He is part of a much more conservative generation. He even, by the way, teaches Sunday school. That is one of the facts about him that is passed on to us by Sammy. He is so conservative, quote unquote, that he is involved heavily in the church, so much so that he is passing on. He is a teacher in. He is an authority of the church itself. The girls come in dressed in liberated fashion. They come in dressed in a sexually provocative way. They come in dressed in a way that shows off much more of their skin than the older and more conservative generation would be comfortable with. And in fact, that is the part of this that Lingle notices. When the girls walk in, Sammy and his coworker notice how good they look, how attractively they're dressed. Not that they are dressed in inappropriate fashion, but that they are dressed in a fashion which garners attention, garners the attention of the young men. When Lingle chastises them, it is an attack on Sammy's generation. Sammy is of the generation that's okay with girls wearing their bikinis in public. Sammy is of the generation that is more quote unquote sexually liberated than Lingle's generation. Sammy is of the generation where the attention that the girls might receive is theirs to call upon, versus Lingle, who seems to think that simply asking for that attention, grabbing that attention, is no good. It is not to be done. Lingle embarrasses the girls because of this. He chastises them in front of not only Sammy and his coworkers, but also in front of other customers. And in a way, whether you're willing to grant this type of whether you're willing to grant this type of mindset to Sammy or not. And I think so. I did a little bit of reading on this short story. This is criticized very heavily for the things that it's saying, and I don't know if the critics who are really reading into it understand exactly what they are telling about themselves. Sammy is criticized oftentimes for noticing the sexuality of it. Notice how attractive the girls are. And of course he does. Sammy, he's 19 in 1961. He would have hit puberty in the mid 50s, early mid 50s. There was nothing like this when he was coming into puberty. So to think that by the time he is an adult, 19 years old, he's not going to think this way is absolutely astonishing. But critics never cease to amaze me. Critics never cease to amaze me by bringing into a short story all of their own baggage, bringing into a short story all of the things that they wanted to say anyway, bringing into a short story a whole bunch of silly crap. Now look, short stories, poetry, novels, you can use them to say anything that you want to say. But to use what you want to say to chastise the characters or the piece or the author, well, shove off. Where was I? Oh, yeah. So Sammy, in whether you want to grant him this thought process or not, quits his job in solidarity with the girls. Does he quit his job in solidarity with the girls in order to get their attention, garner their attention? He hopes to, but I don't think that there's any reason to believe that is the sole reason he does it. And here's another thing. More interestingly, perhaps, these girls, these young women, we don't know their ages, right? So girls, young women, that apparently they are around Sammy's age, we think. They are the highlight of Sammy's day, right? These young women come in and they're attractive, and Sammy gets to gawk at them for the 5 minutes that they are in the store. So in addition to the principle of the fact that your boss shouldn't be coming out and embarrassing customers in public, the highlight of Sammy's day was just told, you have no place here. So Sammy is on the receiving end of the message that anything that could be good about this job, that's not utterly boring about this job, anything that could be good, we're going to shoo out as fast as possible. If the boss sees it, the boss is getting rid of it. Basically saying to Sammy that there's not going to be anything good about this job. Now here's, along those same lines, something interesting to be noticed about this short story in a time capsule sort of way. All of the guys in this story that are pointed out as individuals, so there are men ostensibly in this short story that are never pointed out. They are noted as part of a couple. They are a couple. But all of the individual men in this short story are working. Sammy's friend, the boss, the guy who's delivering the cabbage, the guy who's cutting the meat in the back. Those are the men in this short story. Whether they're mentioned only once in jest or not, those are the men in the short story. All of the women in this short story, so all of the men are at work making money. All of the women are shopping, spending money. This is interesting because this was published in 1961. It was the 60s where there was an explosion of women in the workplace. So sure, there are gender arguments to be made there. You could be writing a short story, you could be writing a criticism or making a video about those sorts of ideas in the short story, because yes, those things are going on. But in my estimation, the most interesting part of that is simply the observation. 1961, 1960, 1970. This is the decade where women enter the workforce. This short story published here. So by here, many more women in the workforce than here. So it's just it's an interesting thing to me that this happens so clearly on the page. And I think that if you were reading this in 2024 and it was introduced to you just as a short story, you didn't. So in my book here, at the end, it has 1961, which is the year the short story was published. This book carries all of the publication dates with it. If you were to read this outside of that context, I think that the gendered arguments would be interesting in a much different context. In my estimation, they are interesting in this short story with knowing the year, because if this short story were written 4 years later, published 4 years later, 5 years later, probably that wouldn't be the case. Maybe the person next to Sammy on the register would be a female. I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, right? I'm not a huge John Updike critic. I haven't read all of his work, anything like that. I doubt very much that this was a decision from the author. I think that it was just John Updike sat down to write this story and thought, oh, well, what's Sammy's coworker going to be? Well, the guy next to him is going to be a guy. The person cutting meat going to be a guy. The boss going to be Mr. So-and-so. I don't think that it was a decision that, oh, this has to be a man, that has to be a man. Everyone that comes in the store should be a woman. This was probably just representative of the world in which this short story was written. It's just interesting. As far as writer's corner notes are concerned, what can we take from this piece as a writer? The number one thing in my estimation is voice. Voice is a very difficult thing to sort of build as a writer, a very difficult thing to comprehend in my estimation as a writer. What is the definition of voice? Voice refers to, and this is a definition that I stole from the internet somewhere, I don't remember where now. Voice refers to the unique style, personality, or perspective of a piece of writing. I'm going to stop right there because it really refers to the unique style, personality, and perspective. Like all three of these things combine into voice. You can't, all three. So, first person, second person, third person, right? There's three types of persons. You can have first person, you can have third person omniscient, third person limited, third person psychic distance, between the third person. So there are gradients inside there, but it's basically first person, second person, and third person. Voice is not that way. There's a billion voices to pieces. Basically, everything written has its own voice. Even things from authors like Chuck Palahniuk, who all of his writings sort of feel similar, all of the pieces have a different voice. So, voice refers to the unique style, personality, or perspective of a piece of writing. It can often set the mood or tone and varies by author or the type of work they write. Literary voice incorporates many elements, including language, writing style, points of view, and tone. So, kind of, the first sentence to this definition is throwaway because we get into all of the things that it does mean with that second and third sentence. But voice is something that all writers use the same X, Y, and Z. Use the same first person, second person, third person. Use the same present tense or past tense. All writers use the same those tools. Every writer, every piece creates its own voice. When a voice is strong, it makes everything else in a piece more acceptable. This is sort of why Hemingway is so impressive to me, because Hemingway uses almost the same voice in all of his short stories, for sure, but also that voice is very bland. The voice itself is very bland, and he pulls off so much with it. William Faulkner uses a very eccentric voice. Chuck Palahniuk, very eccentric voice. And so they are beloved as writers. The last thing I want to talk about here happens close to the end here. When Sammy is ringing them up, he goes into this sort of fantasy about his own life and what would it be like meeting their family, all these sorts of weird things. And he mentions, and this is just an interesting detail because of what it tells us about Sammy. And this is the reason I put this in the writer's corner, is how smoothly little things like this can be slid in and what they can do for the overall feel of the story. Quote, "They were all holding drinks the color of water with olives and sprigs of mint in them." Well, those are martinis, right? This is an interesting way to tell us that Sammy doesn't drink, that Sammy has no experience with alcohol, because gin or vodka, yeah, they're the color of water, but is that the first thing you would use to describe either gin or vodka? No, it's not what you would do. Anyway, that is A&P as I see it. That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on the channel, dropping multiple videos every week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.